Kelly, next time you can borrow Wilson to talk to, so you don't have to just talk to the chair. I want to start out, I want everybody to get up. We're all chiropractors, so to some degree, we all believe that movement is life, right? So get up, kind of shake it out a little bit. You just sat through a great 25-minute lecture by Dr. Holt explaining what subluxation is and how chiropractic affects the brain, and I'm going to try to kind of dovetail off of that. All right, everybody can sit down now. Just relax. Note that this time I had you sit down. So I had to do that to right a wrong of mine from back when. I'll tell you a quick little story. The last time I was in this hotel speaking at a Life Vision, at the beginning of my talk, it was the first time I spoke in front of a group like this, and I had everybody stand up at the beginning of my talk, and I forgot to tell them to sit down. So for 18 minutes, everyone's standing there kind of awkwardly like, can we sit? Simon didn't say sit yet. Am I all right to do this? So thank you. I finally, 3 years later, I have righted my wrong of making everybody stand through my entire talk. But by all means, if you want to get up and walk around, please feel free. So it really is an honor to be on the stage with people this weekend. We got to thank Dr. Gilles Lamarche and everybody else, Dr. Klum, Dr. Riekman, the Rubicon Group for putting this together. You've had some amazing people from literally all over the world. Unfortunately, I got to follow up the cool accent too, but just a phenomenal thing. I've really been nerding out and trying to catch some of these talks as we go and really absorb as much information as I can from these people. So you guys are really fortunate to have learned from some really awesome speakers. I want to start my talk with a bit of a challenge to our profession. I love this quote by Albert Einstein. Insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And I would argue that chiropractic is a little bit insane at times.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Rubicon Conference.
Good morning. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad. So Dr. Wakefield is up here, and he had the mosquito in amber earlier, and he brought up Jurassic Park. Do you guys remember the part in Jurassic Park where the raptors were trying to escape the cage? But instead of running into the same place all the time, they kept trying different parts of it until they eventually broke out. Well, in chiropractic, we don't do that. We seem to keep running into the same area in the cage and trying to break out. We have this issue, if you were here last night for Dr. Judson, he brought up the point that we need to unify our profession. We've been fighting for too long. We've been doing the same thing, arguing over too many different things, and not unifying to get our message out there to the public that needs us now more than ever. And that's the definition of an insanity. We've been doing the same thing, trying to use the same message that they're just not getting. And I hope if nothing else comes out of this conference, we take out the fact that we are all brain doctors. We all affect the nervous system. There's been a lot of people up here explaining how that happens in little bits and pieces, and I'm going to try to continue down that rabbit hole. The bone on a nerve theory is great, and I'm not standing up here saying that it doesn't happen in some way, shape, or form, or it's not somehow a player. But when you talk to your patients about a bone resting on a nerve, and then I'm going to pick that bone up and move it off of the nerve, and I'm going to restore function and health, they don't get it. But people understand that the brain is the master system and the control system of our body. It's the master system and the control system of our entire life. We need to start shifting our conversation more into being doctors of the nervous system, doctors of the brain, improving neurological health and wellness. Because otherwise, we're insane. We keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. We keep having the same conversations, expecting them all of a sudden to get it. And you're here learning about some of the cutting-edge research that's being done for us to help prove what we do is actually happening. So we've got to start shifting our consciousness as a whole and unify under this science. Because whether we like it or not, what's the current language in healthcare? Yeah, the currently accepted language is science. We have to speak it in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, we're missing out. We're doing some great research here. Stephanie Sullivan is leading the research department. Heidi in New Zealand. They're putting together a body of evidence with QEEGs here on campus, with other ways that they're doing it in New Zealand, to show how we affect the brain. We have to start shifting that consciousness. We have to start shifting that thought process. Because if we really think about it, that bone on a nerve theory, or keeping our profession segmented into different groups, is that view more vitalistic or more mechanistic? Are we more mechanistic, thinking about a bone resting on a structure interfering with flow? To me, that sounds pretty mechanistic when you think about it. By segmenting our profession into multiple pieces and saying, well, you do this technique and you do this and you do that, is that more mechanistic, breaking the whole into parts, or is that more vitalistic? I would argue it's more mechanistic. So we've got to start doing what we say. We've got to start practicing what we preach. Now, the Rubicon group has done a great job in constructing a definition of subluxation that starts to enter into the equation with neurology, which I think is pretty cool, but I'm a neuro nerd, so slight bias there. But to be honest, even their definition is limiting. But they admit that openly. They say this is the start of the conversation. This is what we need to have. We need to start building it. But the definition right now is all that we currently have as a body of research to support what we say. But in my opinion, and I'll demonstrate how I think this, it's still a little bit limiting. But we need to support all of the researchers, all the research groups in any way possible to get more evidence out there, because that is the language, that is the currency of the conversation. If we want to have a conversation with most people around the world in healthcare, we need science to support that. So we need to start doing what we can do to help and push that message. And I think the neurological message, the neuroplasticity model of subluxation is about as close as we're going to get for right now. So it's a really good definition, really wordy, lots of words. I want to offer up a little different definition for the purpose of this talk. I want to simplify it down a little bit. Because to me, this is what a subluxation is. It's an interference in the nervous system. Dr. Holt just stood up here and told you what the brain's job is, what your nervous system's job is, right? It has to perceive the environment around you, has to process all of that sensory information using all of the receptors that are coming in, whether it's the new fun receptors they found on the back or the old outdated ones that are in your eye, right? All of those receptors come in and they pool and they form a imprint of what your reality is. And then that reality is processed, it's integrated in different areas of the brain, and then that reality forms your personality. And that's key. When we think about what it is that we do, you're altering someone's perception, right? So we're looking at this as subluxation as an interference in the nervous system. That interference can happen at any point. It can happen on the garbage in, or on the influx, the afferent information, the sensory information coming in, or it can happen on the way out with the motor control issues. Now the other thing, and this is where I really think that the definition is limited right now, motor control, we think of right now as moving a joint or moving a muscle. That's a motor movement, right? We need to start wrapping our heads around our motor movements are also our thoughts and our emotions, because that's what most people need help with right now. In the beginning, remember this guy? Cool beard. Tom, his is better than yours, though. D.D. Palmer. For this guy, it was always about the brain. What's the first chiropractic story? Right, this guy whacks a dude on the back. Depending on what article you read or what paper, it was cervical spine, thoracic spine, somewhere in there, right? And then all of a sudden his hearing was restored. So which nerve is it that runs from anywhere in the spine? I don't care, C1, T2, that goes to the ear? There isn't one, thank you. I spent a good part of my first introduction into chiropractic trying to find it. But there isn't one, so how the heck did all of this happen? How do we change a guy's hearing by removing a subluxation in the spine? And the answer is, we change the tone. And this is where I think this profession gets really fun, because Didi called it tone, neuroscience calls it the central integrated state. And if you talk to some of the woo-woo chiropractors out there, right, we all know that term in chiropractic, some of the energy medicine people, my wife is one of them, so I can say woo-woo. It's all about energy, right? And you had Bruce Lipton up here talking about how we're actually energy and we're actually light. And I think it's great because we're all having these conversations And we're all trying to prove our point. We're all using our own language. And I think essentially we're all saying the same thing. Dee Dee talked about tone and mental impulses and life force. In neuroscience, they talk about the central integrated state, or the hum of the brain, or the vibration of the brain. In the woo-woo chiropractic stuff, or mind-body medicine, they talk about the energy or the vibration in the brain. Are you vibrating at a higher level or a lower level? We know that we need to vibrate at a higher level to be our best self. And vibrating at a lower level leads us to disease and breakdown, depression, and all of those types of things. And that's how all of these things that we have work. All of the techniques work. You've heard Heidi say from the stage that it's not necessarily about the technique, but if it's a person that's a master delivering that technique, do they have intention behind what they're doing? Are they focused in delivering that technique? So something like network or BGI can have a huge and profound effect on the vibration of a system with that person's intention, just like a high velocity, low amplitude thrust can, or an activator, or any of those pieces of equipment that we utilize in our profession. Because you're changing the vibration of the system. You're changing how the system works, right? That's the quantum mechanics model, or quantum physics model, that Bruce was talking about. How we're all light, we're all waveform. You know what? Neurology is actually starting to catch up to that. Everybody remember saltatory conduction? That's how nerves work, right? We get a bunch of synapses, they feed into impulses into the body of the cell, and then you take all of those collection of impulses into the body of the cell. If we get enough of them, they meet at the axon hillock, and we fire all or nothing down the line, and we get an action potential, right? Well, they're finding out in research right now, there's two fundamental problems with that theory. One, it's just not fast enough to describe how the brain and the nervous system work, how they're able to respond as quickly and efficiently as it does. And two, I think this one's kind of important. Every time you felt, thought, or moved, you would spontaneously combust. Might be a problem to existing if you're on fire, just a thought. Because that actually creates too much heat to be efficient and be effective. You would actually burn up anytime you felt or thought or did anything. But what they're now starting to recognize, and they're actually pulling this research back from the 50s that kind of got buried, and it's a term called soliton propagation. And what they think is that, you heard a couple of people now, Dr. Pompo talked about it, and Bruce talked about it, about membranes around cells. And your nervous system, your neurons, are cells as well. They have that same lipid membrane. And what's important about that lipid membrane is it's fluid, it's movable. So when you ping one end of the neuron with a receptor, you cause a ripple in that neuron, or a waveform, or it acts like light, depending on who you're talking to. And that ripple then instantly communicates with the next neuron down the line and sends another ping and another ripple, which then continues up the line instantaneously. So neurology is actually even coming around to this quantum physics model of us being and acting and communicating within our own body more like waves or more like light. So it's kind of cool to be in this profession right now, because everything, you've got this confluence of information, and all of it's coming together under the same way. Again, we're all using maybe different terminology or our language to talk about it, but it's all coming to light in the same way. So what does the adjustment do? Dr. Holt gave you some really good groundwork and laid the groundwork for a lot of this already, which is great. I don't have to go into some of the basic science. It activates very specific brain areas. And I'm going to talk specifically about the cerebellum and the prefrontal cortex, because they're kind of the most important part, right? The cerebellum is where all of the research is going right now, at least a lot of the research, because the cerebellum has more neurons, more synaptic connections than the entire rest of the brain combined. And all we learned to test it was one-legged stand and touch your nose, right? Things you do on the side of the road on a bad Saturday night. But the cerebellum is so much bigger of a player. It's involved in emotional regulation. It makes things balanced, smooth, and coordinated, right? Well, it does that for your movements, but it also does that for your thoughts, your emotions, your immune system, your gut function, your digestion. Because it has that many neurons. It plays in everything. Oh, and by the way, it feeds the prefrontal cortex. And that's pretty important. It kind of makes us human, right? That's what separates us from the animals, is the size and the function of our prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex, your frontal lobes are what allow you to be social, realize everything's going to be okay, see the big picture, see past the issues or problems you have in your life. Because if you're not living in your prefrontal cortex, then you're living in your limbic system, which is more responsible for survival and day-to-day tasks and just making it to the next day. But the problem with living in that limbic system is if we live in that limbic system, everybody's now an enemy. And we become withdrawn. And we become antisocial. Because it's a lot easier to survive till tomorrow if you don't make yourself vulnerable. But the frontal lobe allows you to realize that vulnerability is okay and it's actually necessary. We're one of 2 animals on the planet that have to have social interaction in order to have a healthy brain. And I think that's pretty cool. That's what you're activating with that adjustment. When you fire that HVLA, you're sending an afferent signal up, a huge afferent barrage, and the cerebellum is what gets it first. So you're changing the function, you're changing the connectivity, whether you want to call it a reset or whatever, in the cerebellum, which then fires forward to that frontal cortex. That's pretty important. And in both of those areas, the cerebellum and the frontal cortex are responsible for regulation and control of everything. Our autonomic nervous system, it keeps us out of fight and flight and in rest and digest. It allows us to be healthy, it allows us to grow. And if you do it enough, you get long-term potentiation. That's just a fancy term for things you do more often, you learn better, you develop a pattern to it. And when you develop long-term potentiation, you activate your early immediate gene response, you activate C-FOS and C-Jun, and you start creating new and better proteins. So the person that got up off your table is literally, on a cellular, physical, chemical, neurological level, a different person than they were when they laid down. They're perceiving their environment better. That's how Harvey Lillard got his hearing back. We changed the function. We brought the hum of his brain up. We increased his vibrational frequency. We improved his central integrated state. However you want to look at it, he was a better, more complete person with more appropriate proteins being created in his cells than he was when he laid down. Hearing was just a symptom that he had that proved his system was breaking down. And when the system starts to break down, we end up in that limbic brain. Who's driving in our society right now? Fear or love? Fear. We had another school shooting in Santa Fe this week. They don't even make the news anymore. That's sad, isn't it? We've got a society of depressed people. So what's the product of fear? Stress, frustration, depression, anxiety. The number 1 medicated condition worldwide is neuropsychological conditions. Now, I know we want to talk about the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis has nothing to do with pain. I know that 50% of the people that are on opioids were prescribed for pain, but it has nothing to do with pain. It has everything to do with addiction. And addiction has everything to do with neuropsychological disorders like depression, anxiety, and stress. We need to wake up and get our together because we're the best option for this. The pain and dysfunction are simply just a symptom of that disease process taking place. So we don't even use pain questionnaires in my clinic. I don't care if you're in pain, and I don't mean to sound crass about that. We use things like the Oxford Happiness Scale or the Depression, Anxiety, Stress Symptom Score, because that's what I care about if I'm making changes in those things in your life. Because this is where most people are at, right? They drove into the wall, and they're starting to break. You see it everywhere. Newsweek, Men in Depression, Time Magazine, Anxiety, Depression, and the modern adolescent. Even our kids are depressed. Kids should be out playing. I love this one on the left. Is our treatment of depression all wrong? Of course it is. You're giving them SSRIs. Oh, and the new one, SNRIs. You guys heard of that one? It's a selective norepinephrine serotonin reuptake inhibitor. You know how the doctor told me what it was? This is how he described it. It doesn't just take away the sad, it makes you happy. Well, crap, your antidepressants already up the rates of suicide. Now you're giving them more energy to do that? Crap, we should be worried. Because you know what? They realize their drugs don't work. You know what their next drugs are that they're rolling out? MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, ecstasy, magic mushrooms, and LSD. That's their treatment for neuropsychological conditions like depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. Are you kidding me? You're just going to give it to them. Skip the middleman. Make it easy, right? What happened to this? This is our roots. This is where we started. We know we're the best option for this. We always have been. But we developed this, in order to fit into this box, we clung to this bone on a nerve thing and talked about reducing pain, and then we got paid for insurance, and all was good, and it was great. But we lost our vitalistic roots in the meantime. They were adjusting bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and getting great results. You heard Dr. Judson talk about it. That's what he adjusted his clinic. Why are we limiting ourselves? This is what people have right now. Neuropsychological conditions. People are suffering. They're miserable. And we're the best option. Again, we need to get our together and get this going. The research is out there. In New Zealand, they're doing great work showing the effects and the changes that we have on the brain. Bruce has put together laid the groundwork for how we can literally change genetic expression with thoughts and adjustments and movements and emotions and all of that. Why are we sitting here still talking about other things? This is where we need to embrace. Because the reality is, this is all that matters. Looks like a simple soccer ball. This is from 2 patients that came to see us this week in the clinic. They didn't come to us for neck pain, back pains, or headaches. This woman came to us. The mother came first, and we saw her for 2 weeks, and we got her daughter for a week. But Meg came to us because she was in a really bad car accident. She had a traumatic brain injury. And, she was in an accident. The last thing she remembers is seeing this guy swerve at her and stare at her as he runs into her car. She got knocked off the embankment. She's laying upside down. She doesn't know for how long, 5 minutes, an hour. She woke up to the paramedics doing this to try to revive her. When she got to the hospital, the police officers talked to her and said, we're really sorry. Usually when people commit suicide, they run into a semi. They don't pick a random car out on the road. She's like, what? And they said, oh, yeah, there was a note in the car. He was committing suicide. So he was staring at you when he ran into you because he chose you. So this woman's got a traumatic brain injury out of this. And can you imagine that emotional trauma that goes along with it? So she came to us. She had pain, but again, never really cared or asked too much about that. Her symptoms were, anytime anybody would snap their fingers, she would go into a violent seizure, back and forth. Bright lights, loud sounds would set her off. She couldn't have anyone come anywhere near her. She didn't have the energy to cook or be a mom anymore. Her kids were taking care of her. She couldn't leave the house on her own unless her husband or daughter was holding her hand and walking her out. She would literally freeze. That's the Vegas, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. She told us when her dog took off out of the house, she went to go chase it, and she ended up like this. Like literally frozen from fear. She couldn't get into that frontal cortex anymore. She was living in that limbic brain. So we did some work on her. We worked on her for a whole week. And halfway through the week, she's like, my daughter really needs to get treatment here too. And then we found out that her daughter was abused in college the year before and hadn't laughed or smiled since. And her daughter happened to be here with her because they were worried that their daughter was going to make another attempt on her own life if she was left at home by herself. So we started working with both of them. Both of them got adjusted every day. We needed to activate their cerebellum, their frontal cortex. That second week with Meg, the first week we couldn't adjust Meg because she just had too much going on from the violent head shakes. The second week, she got adjusted every day. Suze, her daughter, got adjusted every day. We did NET to work on the emotional limbic triggers that were in there, keeping both of them from getting into the frontal cortex and realizing everything was going to be okay. We had to break those limbic loops and exercise that. And then we did some functional neurology, some applied clinical neuroscience to activate the very specific areas of the brain that we needed to activate. So 2 days ago, Meg walked across the street with us, and then at the top of the street, for the students and anybody who's been to life, you guys all know this. From the top of the street to about the middle of the rugby field is about 150, 200 yards or so. She walked on her own down to the field with nobody holding her hand. We all stayed up on the street until she got down to the end of the middle of the field, carrying a soccer ball. She turned around, took a big deep breath, and then waved for everybody else to come down. She played soccer with her daughter and her husband for the first time in 4 years. And her daughter was laughing, cracking up, smiling, had a huge affect change. Just from all of it, it was great to see. As mom got better, daughter got better. As daughter got better, mom got better. They were connected in their own misery, and now they're connected in their own life, and in their own growth, and in their own going forward without all of that. And that's really what it's all about. The research is great because we need it, because it's the currency with which we can have the conversation in healthcare. But this is all that really matters. They wrote on here, they signed it for us, and Suze is the daughter. She said, "Thank you for making me feel like me again." And mom wrote, "My life has a new meaning. Thank you." That's all that matters. When we can have that profound effect on somebody. Because that's what's in the power of your hands. That's what's in the power of this profession. That's what's in the power of making these changes in people. And again, we need to get our shit together so we can help all of them.